Hello, everybody. This is Ed Weiser, Reef Weiser on the forum, and we're going to have a discussion with Eric Meyer and his new company, Aquabiomics, who he tests your bacteria in your aquarium, and he's going to explain to you a little bit about the process and why we want to do this. So take it away, Eli.
All right. Well, good morning. Thanks for the chance to talk with you about my new microbiome testing service. So my name's Eli Meyer, and my company is Aquabiomics. We are testing the microbes that are in your aquarium. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have about that service.
Okay. What kind of are the particular bacteria that we should be looking for in the aquarium?
Yeah. So I think the first thing I want to say is the way that I do this test will show up any kind of bacteria in your aquarium. We don't have to know ahead of time what we're looking for. But what should we be interested in when we get those results back? Well, there's some beneficial microbes that we probably all know something about. They process the nutrients in your aquarium and convert ammonia into nitrite and nitrate. And there's some harmful bacteria. There's things like pathogens, pathogens of corals or pathogens of fish. And there's also nuisance bacteria, things like cyanobacteria that cause these big, ugly, kind of red slime blooms in an aquarium. So anything in those groups we can detect with a test of your aquarium water.
Do you test dinoflagellates? Is that another item that you test for? Or?
Yeah, so in the current way that we're doing the testing, no, we don't test for dinoflagellates or any other eukaryotes. In other words, we're only testing here for bacteria and archaea, which are described as prokaryotes. Now, with that said, the technology is really flexible, and I'm currently running some tests to expand it to look at some eukaryotes. And I want to get specific here. I think we've all had nuisance algae blooms in our aquarium at some point, and we sat there and scratched our heads and wondered, is that dinoflagellates? Is that diatoms? What is this thing? Well, this test that I'm currently working on will be able to answer that question. But as of today, we're focusing on the bacteria and the archaea.
Okay. Have you found any particular common bacterias other than just the biological type that are common in the aquarium, the reef aquarium?
Yeah. So one of the first questions that we wanted to ask with these data was, what does a normal microbiome look like in a healthy reef tank? We could look at the literature and get some ideas about the kinds of bacteria that we might want to expect there, but we have no way of knowing ahead of time how much of each different kind of bacteria to expect in that reef tank. So I did quite a bit of work just sampling people's tanks, measuring the microbes in their aquariums to develop an idea of what is normal. What is a normal, healthy microbial community? And the answer is there's a couple of families there, a couple of bacterial families that make up most of the microbiome in a reef tank. One of them is the most common family in the ocean. The easily pronounced name for this family is SAR11, S-A-R-11. Might have heard of that one before. We find that as one of the most common families in reef tanks as well. The Flavobacteriaceae is another very common family in reef tanks. So your question about the amounts is exactly right. That's really what we're focusing on with these profiles is, do you have the right amounts of the right kinds of bacteria in your aquarium?
So if you have the wrong amount, what would be the symptoms or that kind of thing going on if you have the wrong flip-flopped kind of thing?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I want to be careful here to distinguish between what we know and what we're kind of speculating and still learning about. We know there's a lot of functions that are important for microbes in the aquarium. Things like the nitrifying microbes that convert ammonia into nitrite and nitrate. And those are bacteria that we can measure how much of those do you have in your aquarium. So it's not just a question of presence or absence, but do you have enough? And so if you had too low of a level of those bacteria, this would be an indication that you don't have a very effective biological filter. If you have a high level of those bacteria, that would mean you do have a very effective biological filter that can process a lot of fish waste.
Okay, what would be the treatment if you had a low level? Would you use like Dr. Tim's or one of the other bacterial supplements to raise your level, or what would you suggest on that situation?
Great question. Yeah. So those products, and I want to steer clear of talking about any particular product here, but there's a lot of bacteria in a bottle products on the market now, and many people have found them effective ways of establishing nitrifying communities in their tanks. I have done an experiment on this. I haven't written it up yet, but here's what I can say about those products. I also found them effective in terms of their activities. That is, when I added bacterial cultures to my tanks, they were able to process ammonia more quickly than if I didn't add those products. So at the level of activity, they seem to work. But I've got to say, I was not able to detect big effects on the microbiome itself. In other words, adding those bottled bacteria didn't seem to have much impact at all on the overall microbial community. So to answer your question, what should we do if we don't have the kind of bacteria that we want? I think the best source that we have evidence for right now is live rock. Get some good live rock, add it to your tank, and after some time goes by, test again to see if now you've developed a large enough community of those bacteria.
You know, another thing that I noticed once was there was a trend of people using fluconazole to treat for like an algae bryopsis and stuff like that. Items like that added to a tank will, I would guess, would really knock out your bacteria count in your tank, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I'm really interested. You know, I've used that product myself. Like many reefers, I've struggled with bryopsis, and I found that product pretty successful. Boy, I wonder what it does to the microbial communities in your tank.
Yeah, that's what I noticed that happened to one of my tanks when I did it, and it really messed up the whole bacterial community, and I started getting dinoflagellates, and just the slippery slope of that happening, and I had to eventually break the tank down because of it. So
yeah, that's right. Yeah, I'm generally pretty cautious these days about adding things to my tank that are designed to kill one group of organisms, because I suspect it's going to kill more than that group of organisms, and having lots of unknown mortality in the tank just doesn't seem like a good strategy. What I prefer is to take things out of the tank, dip them, and then put them back in. Right. So when I was doing my treatments for bryopsis, I often would take my frags out and soak them in the treatment rather than going into the whole tank.
Yeah. Right, because it's a reef tank is more of a holistic kind of thing, and if you just treat the whole thing for just one little thing, it could, to what you're doing to the whole web of bacteria and such in your tank. Yeah. It's a lot more complex than, say, a freshwater aquarium with just plants. In that sense, because there's a lot more bacterium in the tank, and just it could be a slippery slope in a tank, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, go on.
That's where the service comes in, because I think there's a lot of reefers out there running basically really good experiments in their own living rooms. They've got a controlled ecosystem in their living room, and they add one ingredient to it, and they observe a change. But what they're missing is the ability to measure the effect on the microbes themselves. And so that's really what my service offers. I can tell people who are running those experiments in their living rooms, what was the effect of that medicine on the microbes in your tank.
Right. What if I get a kit and you ship it to me, and then I do my test and I send it back to you? What is the turnaround time on something like that, and how do you access the results? Do you send us an email or what, that kind of thing?
Yeah, good question. So the answer on turnaround time is it's not as fast as any of us would like it to be. If you look at any of these other microbiome companies out there, there are microbiome companies that you can analyze your dog's stool or your own stool if you're interested. And they'll give you a turnaround time of 1 to 3 months. So I give you that number for context. I promise a turnaround time of 1 month, and I aim for a turnaround time of 2 weeks. The reason for these turnaround times, the technology requires that we process samples in batches. I can't just process one person's sample today. I have to process a batch of them together. And so I'm accumulating enough samples to process batches. These batches include my own samples from experiments I'm running in-house here, as well as samples from clients.
So it's not just like doing a water test or an ICP test where they can just stick it in the machine and just run the test in 15, 20 minutes and shoot out an answer. It's a lot more. That's right. It's a more complicated system than just a straight water test, say.
That's right. I think that's the biggest limitation for turnaround time is with ICP they can test one sample. I have to test many samples at once.
There you go.
Your other question was about how are you provided with the data. So when your data are ready, I do send out an email to the clients telling them your data are ready, and they get a link to go to the data. The report describing your tank is located on my website. So you click the link in the email, it takes you to the website, and you can see the report there. And of course, it'll stay there on the website. You can come back and access it anytime in the future.
Okay. Do you recommend doing these tests like every so often, like every 6 months or once a year, or what do you recommend on something like that? On the
well, as the guy running the service, I'd love to say, do the test once a week, right? So here's my honest answer. At the beginning, when you don't know anything about the microbiome in your tank, and I think that describes basically all of us right now, I think it would be very useful to get at least one measurement of the microbiome in your tank. So you can ask the question, is my microbial community similar to other people's reef tanks, or is it completely different? I think of this a lot like when I sent off my first ICP test. It isn't that I had a concern about any particular chemical in my water. I just wanted to know, do I have a water chemistry problem or not? Right? Do I have normal chemistry or not? And so I'd say any aquarium keeper could benefit from sort of a one-time analysis to ask that question. The next part of my answer is, if you make any big changes to your reef tank, I think it would be wise to consider a test or two around those changes. After you've just made a change, it would be great, like some of the chemicals we were talking about earlier, if you've added that to your tank, it would be great to know right afterwards what was the impact on your tank. I think, people running big aquaculture operations may benefit from doing just a regular service once a month, just find out if anything weird is going on in the microbiome. But I suspect the average hobbyist is not gonna need a once a month service.
Right. I think it's always good, like in any kind of testing. It's like I just went to had my yearly physical at my doctor last week, and she said, let's run a baseline test of blood, so I get a bunch of blood samples and get a baseline. And then she can come back and say, well, we need to investigate this or that or whatever. It's the same thing on that way. If you do a baseline test once a year, at least you know if your levels are off, because everybody's levels are different, and you'll know the one is higher than the other and that kind of thing. And then you can get some as we go along in this process, we will be able to say, well, you've got this kind of issue, and maybe you need to do this to help get your bacteria up. And that'll probably help a little bit as far as where we always say, aquarists always says, well, every tank is different. Well, why is every tank different? And how can we make the tanks more even and more into this baseline to make a better even quality, and so everybody knows that this is what we want to follow, and it makes everybody more successful is what I'm looking at, down the road. That's the hard part.
Yeah, I really like what you said about every tank is different. I think many of us have had that observation, right? This coral does well in your tank and it dies in mine, or vice versa. But we measure our water chemistry and our lights and our current, and we think everything's the same, right? I used to say I suspect there are differences in the microbiome of these different tanks. Now I can say I know there are, because we just finished a study of 20 different tanks, and I found that about half of them have very, very similar communities. I describe this as kind of the consensus, sort of the typical normal community. The other half, they were each different in their own way. So, you know, when we observe that people's tanks behave differently, I think a lot of that is coming from these underlying differences in the community. And it'd be great to know that at the beginning. Is my tank different or not?
Right. That way you're not, you know, chasing your tail about something and really, oh, well, we know exactly what your problem is. Because that's what the average hobbyist is go like, why am I not a successful person at doing this? I'm spending all this money and all this time. My wife's getting all upset at me spending all this money and time, and my tank isn't successful. And that's always our main goal down the road, is to make sure that every hobbyist can have a successful reef tank, you know. And that's doing the microbiome thing is getting to that level, you know, just like they found in you know, in people's guts that certain people process, which everybody, I mean, it's something I would think that's normal, everybody knows. Like my dad was always tall and skinny, but my mom was always heavier weight. And so depending on whatever biome you got that gene or in your gut, and that's what you ended up, that's where your weight goes, you know. Right. Yeah, I saw that with my brother. My youngest brother was always tall and skinny like my dad, and me and my other brother had a little bit, we would gain weight here and there, and that's just because the microbiomes were different in each one of us, you know. And that's what we've learned in science, you know, over these last few years.
Right. I mean, that's one of the best documented effects on human health, is the effects on weight.
Yes, it is.
Right. The kind of bugs you have in your gut have a big impact on.
It does have a big impact. That's where it's kind of opened up the door into people thinking about all the other areas of microbiome and into the reef tank or whatever. You see that in anything nowadays is really opened up a big window into everybody when they found out all this information. So
yeah, that's right.
Okay, so what we're going to do now is that we're going to finish this talk right now. We have Don Henderson, Flipper to Pups, on the forum. Has a sample that he's sending in to Eli, and we'll come back when he finishes the sample, and we'll talk to Don and Eli and me and actually figure out what all his stuff means, what his sample means. So I want everybody to know we will have, in probably about a month or so, we'll have another little discussion about what was in Don's tank. So we want to end this now, and everybody have a good day, and we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thanks again.
So that's
Bye.